Hey there! How's it going? Thanks for joining me today. Whether you're relaxing at home, on your commute, or winding down for the evening, I'm really glad you're here. Today, I want to tell you about the most impossible morning that ever happened. 7:43 a.m. on a Tuesday that started like any other, but became the day everything changed forever. Picture this. Your alarm goes off at the usual time. Maybe it's that annoying buzzing sound, or your phone playing some song you've grown to hate because it drags you out of sleep every single day. But this Tuesday morning, something feels off. You can't quite put your finger on it at first. It's like when you walk into a room and sense someone was just there, except the opposite. It's the feeling of absence so complete it has weight. You hit snooze, because who doesn't? And lie there for those precious 9 minutes. But during those 9 minutes, your brain starts cataloguing what's missing. Where's the sound of Mrs. Henderson's ancient Honda coughing to life next door? She leaves for work at 7:35 every single day, has for the past 3 years since you moved into this apartment. That car sounds like it's dying, but somehow it keeps going. Except today, silence. Where's the garbage truck making its weekly racket down on 5th Street? Where are the joggers pounding past your window, their footsteps rhythmic against concrete? Where's that damn rooster from the house 2 blocks over? The one that somehow convinced itself it lives on a farm instead of in the middle of the city. When the alarm goes off again at 7:52, you finally drag yourself out of bed. The shower water runs cold longer than usual, but you barely notice because your brain is still trying to solve this puzzle of missing sounds. You brush your teeth, make coffee, check your phone. Everything seems normal on the surface, but that feeling, it's growing stronger. You walk to your kitchen window, the one that looks out over the courtyard between apartment buildings. Usually you see movement. Someone walking their dog, kids getting ready for school, that guy in the opposite building who always seems to be cooking something that smells incredible. But today, nothing. The courtyard is empty, except for a shopping cart sitting in the middle. Like someone just abandoned it mid-journey. That's when you notice the car. There's a blue sedan sitting at the intersection right outside your building. Engine running. You can see the exhaust in the morning air. But it's been sitting at a green light for how long? The light cycles through. Green, yellow, red. Green, yellow, red. The car doesn't move. There's someone in the driver's seat, but they're perfectly still. Your coffee suddenly tastes like ash. You throw on clothes faster than you ever have and rush downstairs. The usual morning sounds that fill your building's hallway, coffee makers gurgling, people arguing through thin walls, someone's television turned up too loud. None of it. Just the sound of your footsteps echoing in a way they never have before. Outside, the wrongness hits you like a physical force. The blue sedan is still there, still running. You approach carefully, calling out, "Hey, are you okay?" No response. You tap on the window. Still nothing. The driver is a woman, maybe 45, wearing a business suit. Her hands rest on the steering wheel. Her eyes stare straight ahead. She's not blinking. She's not breathing. But here's the thing that makes your brain stutter. She's not dead either. Not exactly. She's just not there. Like someone reached inside and turned off the part that makes her human, while leaving everything else running. You check the other cars. A delivery truck 2 blocks down, driver door open, engine running, packages scattered on the sidewalk like someone was mid-delivery and just evaporated. A school bus, thank God it's empty of children, sitting in the middle of an intersection with its stop sign extended and lights flashing. The driver slumped forward but breathing, just breathing and nothing else. Your heart starts hammering against your ribs. You pull out your phone and call 911. It rings once, twice, then connects to dead air. Not a busy signal, not a recording about high call volumes. Just silence so complete you check to make sure the call actually went through. You try calling your mom. Straight to voicemail, but not her voice. It's the default automated message, like her phone never got set up. You call your best friend Sarah, same thing. Your boss, your neighbor, that pizza place you order from every Friday night. Every number connects to nothing. Now, the panic starts for real. You run to the coffee shop on the corner, Bernie's Brew, where you grab your morning coffee probably 4 days a week. The door is propped open, like always, the smell of fresh roast drifting out onto the sidewalk. But when you step inside, the silence hits you like a wall. Steam rises from abandoned cups scattered across tables. Half-eaten pastries sit next to laptops still displaying screensavers. Behind the counter, the espresso machine hisses and gurgles, making drinks no one ordered. And there's Bernie, or what's left of Bernie, standing behind the register staring at nothing, his hand poised over the cash drawer like he froze mid-transaction. You wave your hand in front of his eyes. Nothing. You clap your hands right next to his ear. He doesn't even flinch, but he's warm to the touch, still breathing that slow, steady rhythm. It's like someone reached into 8 billion people and just switched them off. The rational part of your brain, the part that still believes in logical explanations, starts offering theories. Gas leak, some kind of chemical weapon, mass hysteria. But those theories crumble as you explore more of your neighborhood. Every house you check tells the same impossible story. Breakfast half-eaten, coffee still warm, televisions playing morning shows to empty living rooms. In one house, a shower is still running, bathroom mirror fogged with steam. In another, a dog barks frantically at its motionless owner, pawing at legs that might as well be made of stone. The dog breaks your heart. A golden retriever, probably 8 or 9 years old, circling his owner and whimpering in confusion. When you kneel down, he rushes to you with desperate gratitude, like you're the first person who's acknowledged his existence in hours. You check the man, mid-60s, wearing a robe, coffee mug shattered on the kitchen floor where he dropped it. Breathing but gone, just like all the rest. By 10 a.m., you've checked maybe 30 houses. The pattern never changes. People frozen mid-action, pets confused and frightened, everything else continuing like the world's most disturbing stage play. You adopt 3 dogs and 2 cats along the way. Not planned, but they follow you with the desperation of creatures who finally found something alive that responds to them. You try the hospital. The emergency room doors slide open automatically, but inside, it's like a museum exhibit of interrupted life. Nurses at their stations, doctors mid-round, patients in beds, all breathing, all warm, all completely unreachable. The only sounds are machines beeping, ventilators pumping, and your footsteps echoing through halls that should be bustling with activity. The radio gives you false hope at first. Music plays on every station, DJs chatter between songs, news reports scroll across emergency broadcasts. But as you listen carefully, you realize it's all automated. Pre-recorded segments, computer-generated playlists, emergency systems running on programming that doesn't need human intervention. Even the talk radio shows. It's just computer voices reading pre-written scripts about topics that no longer matter. By noon, you've checked over 100 homes, dozens of businesses, the police station, the fire department, the mayor's office. The story never changes. You find exactly 0 conscious human beings besides yourself. 0. That's when it hits you, really hits you. You're not just alone for the moment. You might be alone forever. The emotional avalanche starts small. First comes the denial. This has to be temporary, right? Some kind of medical emergency that doctors somewhere are working to fix. Then the bargaining. Maybe if you find the right person, do the right thing, everyone will wake up. Then anger. Why you? Why are you the only one? What cosmic joke makes you the sole witness to humanity's strangest day? But it's the loneliness that crushes you. Not the kind of loneliness you feel at a party where you don't know anyone, or on a Friday night when all your friends are busy. This is existential loneliness, the weight of being the only consciousness in a world built for 8 billion minds. You find yourself in the middle of Main Street at 3 in the afternoon. Surrounded by cars, sitting at green lights, their engines running, radio hosts chattering to audiences that no longer exist. And you scream. You scream with everything you have. Rage and terror and confusion all pouring out of you in a sound that should wake the dead, but instead just echoes off empty buildings and fades into silence. No one hears you. No one can hear you. For the first time in human history, there's no one left to listen. You collapse right there in the middle of the street, sobbing among the abandoned cars, while your newly adopted pack of dogs and cats gather around you like they're trying to hold together the last piece of the world that makes sense. As evening approaches, you realize something that chills you to the bone. All those people, your family, your friends, everyone you've ever known, they're not dead. Death would be easier to understand. They're just elsewhere. Their bodies continue the basic functions of life while their minds, their souls, whatever makes them human, have simply vanished into some void you can't even imagine. The sun sets on your first day as possibly the last conscious human being on Earth. Streetlights flicker on automatically. Television shows play in empty houses. Somewhere, automated systems keep the world running while you, surrounded by confused animals and the hollow shells of everyone you've ever loved, try to figure out what happens next. Tomorrow, you'll start learning that infrastructure built for 8 billion people begins falling apart very quickly when only one person is left to maintain it. Tomorrow, you'll discover that survival isn't just about food and shelter. It's about preserving sanity in a world that's become a graveyard of interrupted conversations. But tonight, in this moment, between the old world ending and whatever comes next beginning, you sit in your apartment with 5 animals who chose you as their new anchor to reality, and you start to understand that your life just became something no human being was ever meant to experience. The question that will haunt your dreams isn't, how did this happen? Or when will they come back? The question is, how long can one person carry the weight of being humanity's only remaining witness? 3 days after the morning everyone vanished. You learn the first hard lesson about living in a world built for billions but occupied by one. Everything breaks down faster than you ever imagined possible. It starts with the power grid. You're sitting in your apartment on Thursday night, trying to pretend this is all temporary, while your adopted pack of animals stares at you with those knowing looks that pets get when they sense something's terribly wrong. The lights flicker once, twice, then die completely. Not just in your apartment, across the entire city, darkness spreads like spilled ink. Here's what you didn't know about electricity grids. They're not just automatic systems that run themselves. They require constant human oversight, tiny adjustments every few minutes as demand fluctuates throughout the day. When millions of coffee makers stop brewing, when factories shut down, when every human-controlled variable disappears overnight, the system doesn't know how to balance itself anymore. You stand at your window, looking out at a city going dark in cascading waves. First downtown, then the residential areas. Then even the emergency lighting systems fail as backup generators run out of fuel that no one is left to replace. Within hours, you're living in a darkness so complete it feels prehistoric, but you adapt because humans are surprisingly good at that. You gather every flashlight, every battery, every candle you can find in a 12-block radius. Your apartment becomes a fortress of light, surrounded by an ocean of black. The animals huddle closer to you now. 5 dogs, 3 cats, and a parrot you rescued from a pet store where it kept calling for its owner who would never come. By day 7, the water stops flowing. You turn on the tap in your kitchen, and instead of that reliable rush of clean water that you've taken for granted your entire life, you get a weak trickle, then just air hissing through empty pipes. The pumping stations that push water through miles of underground networks need electricity, need maintenance, need human beings to keep them running. Without that, 8 million people worth of infrastructure becomes 8 million people worth of broken promises. Now you understand why ancient civilizations built their cities near rivers. Water isn't just important, it's everything. You spend the next 2 days in a panic, filling every container you can find before the pressure drops completely. Bathtubs, cooking pots, empty milk jugs, anything that can hold liquid becomes precious. You make your first major discovery during this water crisis. The public library is a goldmine. Not for entertainment, though God knows you'll need that later, but for survival knowledge that your generation never had to learn. You break into the downtown branch, feeling guilty even though there's literally no one left to arrest you, and start pulling books like your life depends on them. Because it does. Medical textbooks, plumbing manuals, electrical engineering guides, farming and preservation techniques your great-grandmother would have known by heart. You create a mobile university and shopping carts, wheeling knowledge back to your fortress of light and learning by candlelight, how to fix water pumps, treat infections without doctors, and grow food in ways that don't require industrial agriculture. But it's day 14 that nearly breaks you. The smell hits first. You're walking through the residential district, looking for a house with a well, or maybe a swimming pool you can use for water, when your brain registers an odor so foul it makes you double over and retch. It's the smell of millions of refrigerators dying simultaneously. Food rotting in every home, every restaurant, every grocery store across the entire city. Imagine the worst smell you've ever encountered, then multiply it by 1,000,000. Every piece of meat, every carton of milk, every leftover container of Chinese takeout in an 800,000-person city going bad at exactly the same rate. The air becomes thick with the sweetly sick smell of decomposition, and you realize you need to get out of populated areas fast. You spend the next week wearing a makeshift gas mask, racing against time to gather supplies before entire neighborhoods become uninhabitable. Medicine from pharmacies before the pills expire and the buildings become tombs. Canned goods from supermarkets where you have to navigate around collapsed ceiling tiles and broken glass while trying not to breathe too deeply. The learning curve proves brutal in ways you never expected. On day 18, you cut your hand badly on a broken window while trying to reach some antibiotics. In the old world, this would be a minor inconvenience. Maybe a few stitches, definitely a tetanus shot, probably healed in a week. In your new world, this becomes a life-threatening emergency. You sit in an abandoned hospital emergency room with medical textbooks spread around you, trying to suture your own wound while reading instructions by flashlight. The hands shaking as you try to thread the needle aren't just from pain. They're from the terrifying realization that every small injury could kill you now. No backup, no safety net, no calling 911 if you mess up, but you do it. Somehow, despite never having sewn anything more complex than a button, you manage to close the wound. It's ugly, it's probably going to scar, but you're alive and the bleeding stops. That night, as you change the dressing using techniques you learned from a nursing manual, you realize you're becoming someone you never imagined you could be. The animals teach you things too, lessons you never expected to learn. The dogs show you which houses might have security systems still running on battery backup. They can hear the high-pitched whines that human ears miss. The cats demonstrate which areas have the most rodents, which turns out to be crucial information for finding buildings where food storage attracted the least insect damage. And that parrot, Oscar, according to his tag, becomes your early warning system. Parrots live for decades and have incredible memories. He starts mimicking sounds from the neighborhood, playing back conversations he heard before everyone disappeared. It's heartbreaking and helpful at the same time. When he mimics the sound of a car engine, you know there might be an abandoned vehicle nearby with useful supplies. By day 25, you've established supply routes through the city like you're running a one-person army. You know which pharmacy still has insulin that hasn't expired, which automotive shop has the best selection of tools, which houses have manual water pumps in their basements. You've learned to hotwire cars when you need transportation, a skill that felt impossibly criminal 3 weeks ago, but now seems as natural as riding a bicycle. You create backup plans for your backup plans. 3 different medical supply caches in case one gets contaminated. Multiple food storage locations in case rodents or mold ruin one's stash. You've become a master of redundancy, because in a world with no second chances, having a second chance might be the only thing keeping you alive. The hardest lesson comes on day 28. When you make a mistake that almost kills you, you're exploring a suburban neighborhood, looking for a house with solar panels and maybe a garden you can learn from, when you ignore your own safety rules. You enter a house where the gas smell should have warned you off, but you're tired and getting careless and really hoping to find some canned vegetables. The explosion isn't huge, but it doesn't need to be. A small gas leak, a spark from your flashlight, and suddenly you're flying backward through a doorway with your eyebrows singed off and your ears ringing like church bells. You lie in the front yard for 20 minutes, checking to make sure nothing important is broken, while Oscar the parrot squawks frantically and the dogs whine with worry. That night, you write your first real entry in what you're starting to think of as your survival journal. Day 28. Nearly died being stupid. Remember, trust your nose. Gas smells exist for a reason. Also, Oscar is definitely smarter than I am. But the strangest thing about these 30 days isn't the disasters, or the steep learning curve, or even the constant underlying terror that you might be the last conscious human being on Earth. The strangest thing is how quickly you adapt to talking to animals like they're your advisory council. You find yourself having serious conversations with Rex, the German Shepherd mix who appointed himself your bodyguard. What do you think, boy? Solar panels on this house look good, but that roof damage might be a problem, and somehow his alert ears and focused attention make you feel less crazy for asking. You explain your daily plans to the cats like they're interested colleagues. Okay, team, today we're hitting the industrial district, looking for water purification tablets and maybe some welding equipment. Luna, you're on mouse patrol. Whiskers, you watch for structural damage. Midnight, try not to knock over any more chemical containers, okay? And Oscar becomes your therapist, your confessor, your link to human voices, even though the words he speaks are just echoes. When he mimics a child laughing, probably something he heard weeks ago in his original home, you have to stop what you're doing and cry for a few minutes. But when he learns to mimic your voice saying, "Good morning, everyone," it becomes the closest thing to human conversation you have. By day 30, you've transformed into something unprecedented in human history. You're part scavenger, hunting through the remains of civilization for anything useful. Part student, cramming years of technical knowledge into weeks of desperate learning. Part wilderness survivor, even though you're surrounded by the hulking corpses of skyscrapers and shopping malls. But mostly, you've become a caretaker, not just for your growing family of animals, but for the ghost of humanity itself. Every supply cache you create, every repair you make to essential infrastructure, every piece of knowledge you preserve, it's all an act of faith that someday, somehow, someone else might need these things. You stand on the roof of your apartment building on day 30, looking out over a city that's already changing in ways that seem impossible. Vines creeping up the sides of buildings faster than they should. Grass pushing through sidewalk cracks that were invisible a month ago. Nature doesn't wait for permission to reclaim what civilization borrowed. Your pack of animals sits around you like a council of advisors. And you realize you've become something that never existed before, the keeper of a dead world's last breath, the guardian of 8 billion interrupted stories, the sole witness to humanity's strangest disappearance. Tomorrow, you'll start learning that survival in the long term means making choices no human was ever meant to make alone. Tomorrow, you'll discover that maintaining sanity in complete isolation requires building a new kind of society with members who can't talk back, but somehow understand everything you're trying to preserve. But tonight, as you ration your candlelight and plan tomorrow's supply run, you're proud of something you never expected. You're still alive, still learning, still refusing to let the world end just because everyone else stopped participating in it. The question that haunts your dreams now isn't whether you can survive the next 30 days. The question is, what kind of person do you become when you're the only person left to become anything at all? 6 months after the morning everyone vanished, you wake up in a place you never imagined you'd call home, a small farm 40 miles outside the city, where the sunrise paints golden light across solar panels. You installed yourself in vegetable gardens. You're slowly learning to coax into productivity. The city nearly killed you in the end. Not from the obvious dangers, the gas leaks, the collapsing infrastructure, the wild dogs that formed packs in the ruins of shopping districts. No, it was subtler than that. It was the weight of 800,000 empty homes, pressing down on your sanity, the constant reminder that you were living in a graveyard, disguised as a metropolitan area. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in month 4. You were scavenging medical supplies from a hospital when you heard it, voices coming from the cafeteria, real human voices having a conversation about the weather. Your heart nearly exploded with hope as you ran toward those voices, calling out, "Hello, hello, I'm here, I'm here!" But when you burst through the cafeteria doors, you found the source, a television playing an old sitcom rerun to an audience of empty chairs. The automated systems were still running, playing recorded human voices to a world that had no humans left to hear them. You collapsed right there on the linoleum floor and sobbed for 2 hours straight, while your pack of animals whined and tried to comfort you with wet noses and warm fur. That's when you knew the city had to go. Too many ghosts, too many broken promises, too many systems designed for millions of people slowly dying around one person who couldn't possibly maintain them all. So you loaded up a pickup truck you'd learned to drive despite never having a license before, packed your most essential supplies and your entire adopted family, and went looking for something manageable, something human-sized rather than civilization-sized. The farm chose you as much as you chose it. 43 acres with a white farmhouse that probably started life sometime in the 1930s, complete with solar panels installed by previous owners who'd been preparing for a very different kind of apocalypse. It had a well with manual backup pumping, a small barn, chicken coops that were empty but structurally sound, and most importantly, it felt possible. But possible and easy are very different things. Your first week on the farm, you nearly poisoned yourself trying to slaughter a chicken. You'd been vegetarian your entire adult life, and the closest you'd ever come to butchering meat was buying it pre-packaged from grocery stores where someone else handled all the unpleasant realities. Now faced with a flock of abandoned chickens that needed care, and the knowledge that protein was going to become a survival necessity, you had to become someone you'd never been before. You spent 3 days reading butchering manuals and watching instructional videos on a laptop running off solar power before you finally worked up the courage to try. The first attempt went so badly that you ended up crying in the barn while the chickens clucked around you with what seemed like disapproval. But hunger is a powerful teacher, and by the end of the month, you could process a chicken efficiently, if not comfortably. The moral calculus of your new life proved more complex than any philosophy class had prepared you for. These chickens were depending on you for food and protection. In return, some of them would become food for you and your pack of animals. It wasn't cruelty, it was partnership, a deal struck between species in a world where the normal rules no longer applied. Learning to preserve food without refrigeration transported you backward through time to techniques your great-grandmother had known by heart. You built a smokehouse using plans from a 1940s farming manual, constructed root cellars for storing potatoes and other vegetables through winter, and learned to can everything from tomatoes to green beans using methods that had kept families fed for generations before electric appliances made such skills seem quaint. The canning process became almost meditative once you got the hang of it. Standing in your kitchen on autumn evenings, processing jars of vegetables while your pack of animals slept around your feet, you felt connected to something larger than your survival situation. Every sealed jar represented security, continuity, the promise that future you would have food even when present you couldn't grow anything. But it was the solar panels that really taught you who you were becoming. Those panels had worked fine for the previous owners, but they'd had an electrical grid to fall back on when something went wrong. You had no such luxury. When the charge controller failed in month 8, you couldn't just call a technician. You had to become the technician. You spent 2 weeks with electrical engineering manuals spread across your kitchen table, learning about voltage and amperage and battery chemistry, while your laptop battery slowly died and the house gradually went dark. Trial and error became your university, and error nearly electrocuted you twice before you figured out how to safely rewire the system. But when those LED lights finally flickered back to life, when the water pump started humming, and the refrigerator you'd salvaged from an abandoned store began cooling again, the satisfaction felt better than anything you'd ever accomplished in your previous life. You'd literally brought light back to a dark world using nothing but determination and library books. Your farming education proved equally humbling and rewarding. The previous owners had left behind established fruit trees and berry bushes, but the vegetable gardens had been neglected since the disappearance. You started with simple crops, potatoes, beans, carrots, things that were relatively foolproof for a beginning farmer who couldn't afford to make mistakes. The failures taught you more than the successes. An entire crop of tomatoes lost to blight because you didn't know about crop rotation. Corn eaten by raccoons because you thought a scarecrow would be enough protection. Lettuce bolted in the heat because you planted it at the wrong time of year. But slowly, gradually, you learned to read the signs. How the soil looked and felt when it needed water versus when it was oversaturated. Which insects were beneficial and which ones would destroy your crops if left unchecked. The way different plants grew and what they needed to thrive. By your first successful harvest, you realized you'd developed an intuition about growing things that you'd never possessed before. Standing in your garden at sunset, filling baskets with vegetables you'd grown yourself, surrounded by animals who'd learned to help you work. You felt something you hadn't experienced since the morning everyone vanished. Pride. Your relationship with animals evolved into something unprecedented in human experience. Without other humans to interact with, your pack of dogs, cats, and Oscar the parrot became your society, your family, your governing council for important decisions. Rex, the German shepherd who'd appointed himself your guardian, learned to patrol the property boundaries and alert you to potential dangers. He could distinguish between the sound of approaching wildlife that might threaten the chickens versus harmless deer just passing through. More importantly, he seemed to understand when you were making a mistake and would block your path or refuse to follow you until you reconsidered. The cats became your pest management team, keeping rodents away from stored food and alerting you to snakes or other dangers you might not notice. But they also served as emotional barometers, sensing when your stress levels were getting dangerous and insisting on comfort sessions that probably saved your sanity more often than you realized. And Oscar evolved into something between a secretary and a therapist. His ability to mimic sounds made him an early warning system for mechanical problems. He'd learned to imitate the sound of a failing water pump or a loose solar panel connection. But his talent for mimicking human speech, playing back conversations he'd heard in his previous life, provided something even more valuable: the illusion of human contact. When the loneliness threatened to overwhelm you, you developed routines that bordered on religious ritual because structure became essential for mental survival. Morning rounds, checking the animals, the solar system, the water levels in your storage tanks. Afternoon work sessions, maintaining equipment, tending gardens, preserving food. Evening planning sessions, where you'd spread maps and manuals across your kitchen table, plotting the next day's activities with your animal council gathered around you. Without these rituals, madness waited at the edges of each silent night. You'd learned that the hard way during your second winter on the farm, when depression hit like a physical weight and you spent 3 days in bed refusing to care for yourself or your animals. It was Rex nudging you awake and the pitiful meowing of hungry cats that finally dragged you back to functionality. You created backup systems for everything because redundancy meant survival. 3 sources of water: the well, collected rainwater, and a hidden spring you'd discovered in the woods. 3 power systems: solar panels, a wind turbine you'd built from scavenged parts, and a manual generator for emergencies. 3 methods of food production: your gardens, the chickens, and preserved wild edibles you'd learned to identify and harvest. But perhaps the most important backup system was emotional. You'd learned to have conversations with yourself that weren't signs of madness, but necessary maintenance for a mind that had no other conscious minds to interact with. Morning pep talks to motivate yourself through difficult tasks. evening debriefings to process the day's challenges and plan improvements, strategy sessions where you'd argue different sides of important decisions until you reached conclusions that felt sound. Your workshop became the physical manifestation of your transformation. What had started as a simple barn had evolved into something part laboratory, part library, part museum of human ingenuity. Shelves lined with technical manuals and scientific journals. Workbenches covered with projects in various stages of completion. Radio equipment you were learning to build. Mechanical systems you'd salvaged and rebuilt. Experiments in sustainable technology that might keep you alive for decades to come. The most profound change, though, was philosophical. In your previous life, you'd been part of a vast network of specialized knowledge. Need medical care? See a doctor. Car trouble? Call a mechanic. Electrical problems? Hire an electrician. The complexity of modern civilization had made each person a specialist in narrow fields while remaining helpless in most. Others, now you were becoming something that hadn't existed for generations, a complete human being. Someone who could diagnose and treat your own injuries, repair your own equipment, grow your own food, generate your own power, and make your own entertainment. Not perfectly, not without mistakes and failures and dangerous learning experiences, but competently enough to stay alive and even thrive. You stood in your garden one evening as your first year on the farm drew to a close, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that seemed more vivid than anything you remembered from your city life. Your pack of animals scattered around you, some playing, some hunting, some just enjoying the warmth of the dying day. The solar panels glinted on your roof, the chickens pecked contentedly in their run, and the smell of wood smoke from your chimney mixed with the green scent of growing things. For the first time since the morning everyone vanished. You felt something approaching contentment, not happiness. The loss of everyone you'd ever known would always be a wound that couldn't fully heal. But satisfaction, pride, the bone-deep knowledge that you'd taken an impossible situation and built something sustainable from its ruins. You'd become the guardian of a tiny kingdom where every citizen except you had 4 legs or feathers, where the economy ran on mutual aid instead of money, where success was measured in successful harvests and systems that kept working rather than in promotions or social status. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, equipment that needed repair, animals that required care, weather that might threaten your carefully constructed survival systems. But tonight, as you performed your evening rituals and prepared for sleep in a bed warmed by animals who'd chosen you as their pack leader, you knew something your old life had never taught you. You knew that one person, given enough determination and the wisdom to accept help from unexpected sources, could build a world worth living in even when the old world had abandoned them completely. The question that followed you into sleep wasn't whether you could survive another year of this strange existence. The question was, what would you become by the time you'd lived this way long enough to forget there had ever been any other way to live? 2 years after the morning everyone vanished, you discover that the human mind, isolated from all other human minds, begins to reshape itself in ways no psychologist ever studied, because no one ever imagined such complete solitude was possible. It starts with the conversations. You're fixing a broken fence post on a Tuesday morning in early spring when you catch yourself having a detailed discussion with Rex about the best angle for setting the replacement post. Not just talking to him the way people talk to pets, actually waiting for his response, interpreting his head tilts and ear positions as meaningful contributions to the conversation, and adjusting your approach based on what you think he's trying to tell you. The rational part of your mind recognizes this as the beginning of something that might be madness. But the practical part of your mind, the part that's kept you alive for 24 months, points out that Rex actually does have opinions about fence posts. He's been patrolling these boundaries every day for almost 2 years. He knows where the weak spots are, which routes the wild deer use to enter the property, and how high the fence needs to be to contain the chickens effectively. So maybe it's not madness. Maybe it's adaptation. The conversations become more elaborate as the months pass. You find yourself holding full debates with your entire animal council, playing different roles in complex discussions about farm management, equipment maintenance, and long-term survival strategy. Oscar the parrot provides the perfect straight man for these performances, occasionally interjecting phrases he's learned that seem remarkably appropriate to the conversation at hand. What do you think about expanding the solar array this summer? You ask during one of your evening planning sessions, spreading equipment catalogs across your kitchen table while the animals gather around. Rex tilts his head and fixes you with that intense shepherd stare that you've learned means he's considering. The question seriously, Luna, the calico cat, jumps onto the table and sits directly on the page, showing battery storage systems, which you interpret as her vote for improving energy storage rather than generation capacity. Battery backup, huh? You say to Luna. That's actually not a bad point. We had that 3-day cloudy stretch last month that nearly drained our reserves, Oscar squawks. Rainy days and Mondays, which is a line he picked up from an old Carpenter's song, but seems oddly relevant to discussions about weather-dependent power systems. To an outside observer, if there were any outside observers left, these conversations would look like the ravings of someone who'd lost touch with reality. But you're not performing for outside observers. You're developing a communication system with your chosen family. And if that family happens to consist of creatures who express themselves through body language, vocalizations, and the occasional repetition of human phrases learned in a previous life, well, that's the family you have. The strangest part is how well it works. Your animals have been observing your routines, your problems, your successes and failures for 2 solid years. They know things about your operation that you sometimes forget. Rex knows the daily schedule better than you do and will start herding you toward necessary tasks if you get distracted. The cats know where you're most likely to encounter problems and will position themselves strategically to provide early warning. Oscar has developed an uncanny ability to mimic mechanical sounds just before equipment failures, giving you advance notice of problems you might not catch otherwise, so when you wait for their input before making decisions, you're not talking to imaginary friends. You're consulting with the most qualified advisory board available to you, but it's the human you create to fill the gaps that really tests your psychological boundaries. Her name is Wilson, and she started as a joke. You were exploring an abandoned department store, looking for winter clothing and maybe some tools, when you found her in the home goods section, a mannequin dressed in a business suit, with carefully styled hair and an expression of polite attention that reminded you of every competent professional woman you'd ever worked with. You started talking to her just to hear human speech patterns again. What do you think, Wilson? This drill set looks pretty complete, but the battery is probably dead by now. She didn't answer, of course. But her expression of attentive listening felt so much like human interaction that you found yourself relaxing in a way you hadn't in months. So you loaded her into your truck along with the drill set and brought her home. Now Wilson sits at the head of your kitchen table during planning sessions, a silent participant in your decision-making process, who represents something you desperately need, the perspective of another human being, even a fictional one. When you're debating whether to attempt a dangerous supply run or trying to decide how much risk to take on an experimental project, you argue both sides of the issue, with Wilson serving as the audience for your internal dialogue. Wilson, I know the nuclear plant is only 50 miles away, and I know the automatic systems are supposed to keep it stable for years. But what if something goes wrong? What if my presence there somehow disrupts systems that are working fine without human interference? You pause, looking at her plastic face with its expression of professional concern. On the other hand, if there's going to be a problem, wouldn't it be better to know about it now while I still have time to prepare? And those emergency manuals might contain information that could save my life someday. Wilson doesn't answer, but somehow Her presence makes the decision-making process feel less crazy, more like the kind of collaborative problem-solving that humans evolved to do in groups. The dreams become your refuge from the complete absence of human society. Every night, you slip into vivid, alternate realities where everyone still exists, where the disappearance never happened, where you wake up in your old apartment to the familiar sounds of a city full of people living their lives. These dreams are so detailed, so emotionally satisfying, that waking becomes a daily trauma. Every morning brings the crushing realization that you've lost them all again, that the voices in your dreams were just your memory reconstructing conversations that will never happen again. You start to dread sleep because it makes you happy in ways that waking life can't match. But you also cherish sleep because it's the only place where you're not alone. You develop strategies for managing the grief of waking. Instead of letting the sadness overwhelm you, you start a morning ritual of writing down everything you can remember from the dream, conversations, observations, small details about people you loved. These dream journals become a way of preserving something precious, even if it's only the echo of human connection filtered through your own imagination. Music becomes sacred. In your old life, you'd listen to songs casually, as background noise or entertainment. Now every song carries the weight of being irreplaceable. When your favorite playlist finishes, you don't immediately restart it. Instead, you ration the emotional impact, saving certain songs for moments when you need them most. A song that reminds you of your sister becomes your birthday present to yourself once a year. A playlist that evokes memories of friends becomes your soundtrack for holidays you celebrate alone. You create new traditions around music, using specific songs to mark important occasions. The anniversary of your arrival at the farm, the completion of major projects, the changing of seasons. You learn to be careful with emotional triggers. That one Beatles song that your dad used to sing in the car during family road trips, you can only listen to it once every few months, or the grief becomes overwhelming. But when you do allow yourself to hear it, the memory feels as real as if he was sitting next to you, humming along off-key the way he always did. Books become time machines, but dangerous ones. Fiction allows you to escape into worlds populated by characters who feel like human companions, but it also reminds you of what you've lost. Reading a novel where characters have casual conversations, where they take human interaction for granted, sometimes leaves you sobbing with loneliness. Non-fiction becomes more manageable because it focuses on information rather than relationships. Technical manuals, historical accounts, scientific journals, these books give you knowledge without triggering the ache of missing human society. But even they carry emotional weight. Every author represents a human mind you'll never encounter, ideas you'll never be able to discuss with anyone who could understand them at the same level. You start writing constantly, not just the practical notes about farm management and equipment maintenance, but extensive journals, letters to people who will never read them, instruction manuals for imaginary future finders who might someday discover your isolated kingdom. The writing serves multiple purposes. It preserves information that might be useful to hypothetical survivors. It provides an outlet for thoughts and observations that need expression. But most importantly, it creates the illusion of communication, the sense that you're sharing your experiences with someone, even if that someone exists only in an imaginary future. Your philosophical questions grow heavier as the isolation continues. If you're the only conscious observer left, do your moral choices matter? When you decide whether to put down a sick animal or to risk dangerous repairs to essential equipment, who's the beneficiary of ethical behavior? If morality evolved as a system for managing relationships between humans, does it still apply to a population of one? You find yourself creating elaborate ethical frameworks for decisions that affect only you and your animals. When you discover a colony of feral cats living in an abandoned barn, do you have a responsibility to help them, even though integrating them into your household would strain your resources? When wild deer eat your vegetable garden, do you have the right to kill them for meat, or does your role as the sole human survivor come with some obligation to preserve rather than consume? These questions have no textbook answers, because no ethicist ever imagined a scenario where one person becomes responsible for representing the entire human species in their relationship with the natural world. But perhaps the strangest adaptation is how you've learned to find beauty in impossible loneliness. Standing in your garden at sunset, watching the light fade over a landscape that belongs entirely to you and your chosen family of animals, you sometimes feel a peace that you never experienced when you were part of the vast, complex network of human society. There's a terrible freedom in being the only person left to make decisions. No bureaucracy, no social pressure, no need to compromise with others who might not understand your priorities. When you decide to spend 3 days building an elaborate playground for the cats, or a week crafting a memorial garden for Rex when he finally dies of old age, there's no one to question whether these projects are practical or worthwhile. You've become the curator of your own existence, the sole audience for your own performance of being human. And you're discovering that without the constant comparison to others, without the pressure to conform to social expectations, you can become more authentically yourself than you ever imagined possible. Your routine becomes your religion, your animals become your congregation, and your small farm becomes a temple to the idea that consciousness, even solitary consciousness, is sacred enough to preserve no matter how difficult the preservation becomes. As your second winter alone draws to a close, you stand in your workshop surrounded by projects that represent years of solitary learning, watching Oscar preen his feathers, while Rex sleeps by the space heater you built from scavenged parts. Wilson sits in her chair, maintaining her expression of professional attention, ready to listen to whatever problem you need to work through next, and you realize that you've built something unprecedented in human history, a life that's completely, utterly alone, and somehow still worth living. The question that keeps you awake on quiet nights isn't whether you're going crazy. The question is, if the definition of sanity requires other humans to validate your grip on reality, and there are no other humans left to do that validation, does the concept of sanity even apply anymore? Or have you simply become the sole judge of what constitutes a reasonable response to an unreasonable situation? You've stopped caring about the answer. Tomorrow there will be animals to feed, systems to maintain, projects to complete. And Wilson will be waiting at the kitchen table, ready to help you think through whatever challenges the day might bring. In a world without other humans, you've learned to be human enough for everyone. Year 3, after the morning everyone vanished, brings a revelation that changes everything. Nature doesn't wait for humans to finish processing their grief before it begins reclaiming the world. You notice it first in the small details. Vines creeping up the sides of abandoned houses faster than seems possible. Grass pushing through sidewalk cracks that were invisible just months before. Trees growing in the middle of roads where seeds found purchase in accumulated debris. The speed of it all defies what you thought you knew about how quickly nature recovers from human interference, but it's the morning you discover the elephant footprints near your water source that you realize the world is becoming something fundamentally different. You're doing your usual dawn patrol, checking the solar panels, examining the chicken coops for signs of nocturnal predators, making sure the water pumps are functioning correctly when you find them. Massive, round impressions in the soft earth around the spring that feeds into your backup water supply. 4 perfect circles, each the size of a dinner plate, arranged in the unmistakable pattern of something very large walking on 4 legs. At first, your brain refuses to process what you're seeing. Elephants don't live within 500 miles of your farm. The closest elephants should be in zoos or wildlife preserves, safely contained behind barriers that require human maintenance to remain effective. But those barriers haven't had human maintenance for 3 years. You follow the tracks carefully, Rex trotting alongside you, with his ears alert and his body language suggesting he's as confused as you are about these unfamiliar scents. The trail leads through your back pasture, across the creek, and into the forest that borders your property. Along the way, you find more evidence: broken branches at heights that would require a creature twice as tall as you, stripped bark from trees, and piles of dung that smell unlike anything produced by local wildlife. That evening, you sit at your kitchen table with Wilson and spread out every map you can find, trying to calculate how far escaped elephants might have traveled in 3 years. The nearest zoo was 43 miles northeast. A wildlife preserve that housed a small elephant family was 68 miles to the southeast. Both facilities would have had backup generators for critical systems, but those generators would have run out of fuel within weeks of the disappearance. Wilson, what do you think happens when electrical fences fail and automatic feeding systems shut down? But the animals are still alive and intelligent enough to figure out how to escape. Wilson maintains her expression of professional concern while you work through the implications. Within days, your property becomes a way station for creatures that were never supposed to share the same ecosystem. You wake up one morning to find a family of zebras grazing in your front yard, apparently unconcerned by your presence as long as you don't move too quickly. A week later, you spot what looks like a lion in the distance, which sends you scrambling to reinforce the chicken coops and create secure nighttime shelter. For your more vulnerable animals, the new wildlife doesn't necessarily pose direct threats. Most escaped zoo animals seem more interested in finding food and suitable habitat than in hunting humans. But their presence transforms your survival situation from challenging to potentially deadly. These are animals with no natural predators in your environment, no learned fear of humans, and no understanding of the boundaries that once kept them separated from agricultural areas. You spend the next month learning emergency veterinary skills because treating an injured chicken is very different from treating an injured horse, and you have no way of knowing what kind of medical situations you might face. Your library raids now focus on wildlife management, animal behavior, and veterinary medicine for exotic species. But it's the nuclear facilities that force you to confront the most terrifying responsibility you never wanted. The automated systems at the closest nuclear power plant have been running without human oversight for 3 years. According to the emergency manuals you've studied, these systems are designed to shut down safely and maintain cooling for extended periods without human intervention. But extended periods, in nuclear engineering terms, means months or maybe a few years, not the indefinite timeline you're facing. The drive to the facility becomes a pilgrimage of terror. You load your truck with radiation detection equipment scavenged from hospitals and research facilities, emergency supplies for a quick retreat if things have gone wrong, and detailed notes about shutdown procedures you barely understand but might need to implement. The power plant sits in a landscape that looks increasingly post-apocalyptic. Parking lots cracked by tree roots, cooling towers stained by 3 years of weather, and an eerie silence where there should be the hum of massive industrial systems. Your radiation detector clicks. Occasionally, background radiation levels that seem normal, but the readings don't tell you whether the reactor core is stable or slowly building toward a catastrophic failure. Inside the control room, banks of monitors display information in technical languages you've spent months learning to decipher. Most systems show green status lights, but several yellow warnings suggest backup systems running on emergency power that won't last forever. You spend 6 hours in that control room, following shutdown procedures step by step, making decisions about systems worth billions of dollars based on instruction manuals written for people with decades of training you don't have. The worst part isn't the technical complexity, or even the radiation risk. The worst part is the crushing responsibility of knowing that if you make a mistake, the consequences could affect hundreds of square miles for generations. You're one person with library book knowledge, making decisions that entire committees of experts would normally debate for hours. But you do it. You shut down what needs to be shut down, stabilize what needs to remain active, and document everything you've done in case someone someday needs to understand what happened here. When you finally leave the facility 12 hours later, your hands are shaking from exhaustion and stress. But the radiation readings suggest you've bought yourself, and whatever's left of the world, more time. Chemical plants present different but equally dangerous challenges. A polymer manufacturing facility 15 miles from your farm develops a leak that produces clouds of vapor you can see from your roof on clear days. You can't identify the chemicals involved, can't predict how toxic the exposure might be, and can't fix industrial equipment you don't understand, so you relocate again. The new farm is smaller, more remote, but far enough from industrial facilities that chemical accidents become someone else's problem. Except there is no someone else anymore. You're learning that being the sole human survivor means accepting responsibility for problems you can't solve and dangers you can't prevent. Cities become death traps as infrastructure fails in cascading ways. Gas lines rupture without maintenance crews to repair them. Buildings suffer structural damage from water infiltration and settle into dangerous instability. Packs of feral dogs establish territories around abundant food sources, becoming aggressive toward any perceived competition for resources. Your supply runs into urban areas, become increasingly hazardous expeditions planned with military precision. You scout routes in advance, identify multiple exit strategies, and never venture into the city without emergency supplies and communication. Equipment that probably won't work when you need it most. It's during one of these urban expeditions that you suffer your first serious injury since leaving the city permanently. You're exploring a medical supply warehouse, looking for antibiotics and surgical instruments, when a weakened floor beam gives way under your weight. You fall 12 feet onto concrete, landing awkwardly, and hearing something in your left leg snap, with a sound that makes your vision go white with pain. Lying there in the darkness, listening to your own ragged breathing echo through the empty building, you realize that this is how most solo survivors probably die. Not from dramatic disasters or exotic diseases, but from ordinary accidents that become fatal without immediate medical attention. You drag yourself to your truck, using upper body strength you didn't know you had, load yourself into the driver's seat despite the excruciating pain, and somehow manage to drive 47 miles back to your farm using only your right foot. Rex meets you in the driveway, taking one look at your condition and immediately shifting into protective mode, staying close while you assess the damage. The break is clean but displaced, visible even through your skin, which has swollen to twice its normal size. You have painkillers scavenged from hospital pharmacies, surgical supplies you've been hoping never to use on yourself, and medical textbooks that suddenly seem inadequate for the reality of treating your own compound fracture. What follows are 3 days of agony that redefine your understanding of pain management and medical emergency procedures. You set your own bone using techniques learned from orthopedic manuals. Suture your own wounds using a mirror and hands that shake from shock and medication, and then spend the next 3 months learning to walk again with no physical therapy except stubborn determination. Rex never leaves your side during the recovery. He seems to understand that you're more vulnerable than usual and appoints himself as your constant companion, bringing you food when you're too weak to get it yourself and alerting you to any sounds that might indicate danger approaching while you're immobilized. The injury teaches you that every small risk in your solitary world is magnified exponentially. A twisted ankle that would be a minor inconvenience in the old world could leave you unable to care for your animals or maintain essential systems. A cut that gets infected could kill you if you don't have the right antibiotics or the knowledge to use them properly. You develop new safety protocols based on the assumption that every injury could be your last. Multiple backup systems for critical tasks. Emergency supplies cached in locations you can reach even if you're severely injured. Communication devices that might somehow reach other survivors if they exist, though after 3 years you've stopped believing they do. Each season brings challenges you never anticipated. Winter freezes pipes you thought you'd insulated adequately, forcing you to crawl under your house in sub-zero temperatures to repair systems while hoping you don't encounter whatever animals might have decided to shelter there. Spring floods wash out access roads and contaminate water sources, leaving you effectively stranded until you can rebuild bridges and dig new wells. Summer wildfires become particularly terrifying because you are the entire fire department for hundreds of square miles. When lightning strikes a forest near your property, you're the only one who can decide whether to evacuate or try to fight the flames with garden hoses and desperation. You spend 2 weeks that summer living in your truck, ready to flee at any moment, while watching flames consume thousands of acres of woodland that no one else will ever see again. Autumn storms topple trees onto power lines you've carefully maintained, onto chicken coops you've rebuilt multiple times, onto the roof of your workshop where you keep the tools and knowledge that keep you alive. Each storm becomes a test of your engineering, skills, and your ability to rebuild quickly enough to prepare for the next disaster. But perhaps the most insidious challenge is the gradual realization that you're fighting a losing battle against entropy itself. Every system you repair breaks down again, usually sooner than it should. Every building you maintain suffers damage faster than you can fix it. Every piece of infrastructure you've come to depend on gradually succumbs to the simple fact that it was designed to be maintained by teams of specialists, not by one person with textbook knowledge and improvised tools. You're not just surviving in a post-human world, you're racing against time itself, trying to keep enough systems functional long enough to stay alive while the entire technological foundation of human civilization slowly crumbles around you, standing in your workshop. On a cold evening near the end of year 3, surrounded by projects in various stages of completion and repair, you realize that you've become something that never existed before in human history. You're a one-person maintenance crew for the remnants of industrial civilization, a solo curator of humanity's technological legacy, a single point of failure for systems designed to support millions of people. Rex lies at your feet, graying around the muzzle now, but still alert to any sound that might indicate danger. Oscar preens his feathers in his cage, occasionally muttering phrases that remind you there were once billions of people who use these words in conversations you'll never hear. Wilson sits at her usual place at the workbench, maintaining her expression of professional attention while you debug problems that would challenge entire engineering teams. Tomorrow will bring new failures to repair, new dangers to navigate, new impossible choices about which systems to maintain and which to abandon as the infrastructure of human civilization continues its inexorable collapse around your tiny island of stubborn functionality. But tonight, as you perform your evening rituals and prepare for sleep in a workshop warmed by a wood stove, you built yourself. You're proud of something you never expected to accomplish. You've kept a small piece of the human world, running for 3 full years after humanity itself disappeared. The question that haunts your dreams now isn't whether you can win this battle against the dying world. The question is, how many more years can you hold the line before the sheer scale of entropy overwhelms even the most determined individual? And what will you choose to preserve when you can no longer preserve everything? By year 5, you've stopped expecting rescue and started thinking about legacy. The transformation isn't sudden. There's no dramatic moment when you abandon hope of finding another conscious human being. Instead, hope simply erodes like everything else in this abandoned world. Worn away by 5 years of empty radio frequencies, 5 years of exploring hundreds of miles in every direction and finding only the hollow shells of people who breathe but don't think. 5 years of calling into the void and hearing only your own echo. What replaces hope is something more profound. Purpose. You wake up one morning in early autumn and realize that your survival has shifted from desperate self-preservation to something approaching stewardship. You're no longer just trying to stay alive. You're trying to be worthy of being humanity's final witness. The weight of that Responsibility transforms everything about how you approach each day. Your library raids become more selective, more purposeful. Instead of grabbing whatever technical manuals might help you survive another month, you start thinking about what deserves to be preserved for hypothetical future discoveries. You create elaborate cataloging systems, organizing books by importance, by rarity, by the likelihood that their knowledge could be reconstructed from first principles by intelligent beings who might someday find your archives. Medical textbooks get priority because biological knowledge might be harder to rediscover than mechanical engineering. Literature gets carefully curated. You save Shakespeare and Toni Morrison and Gabriel Garcia Marquez, but you also preserve popular fiction that captures how ordinary people lived and thought. Children's books get special protection because they contain the clearest expressions of human values and the stories we told ourselves about what kind of species we wanted to be. The choices prove heartbreaking and impossible. Standing in the ruins of the city's main library, you face dilemmas no librarian was ever trained to handle. Save the complete works of scientific journals, or preserve the poetry collection that captures human, emotional experience. Protect the historical archives that document where we came from, or prioritize the technical manuals that might help future civilizations avoid our mistakes. You develop a system. For every technical manual you preserve, you save something that demonstrates human creativity. For every scientific journal, a novel. For every medical textbook, a collection of music or art reproductions. You're trying to ensure that whoever finds your archives, if anyone ever does, will understand that humans were more than just an engineering species that built impressive infrastructure before vanishing. Museums become treasure troves and ethical nightmares. Simultaneously, breaking into the Metropolitan Museum feels like a religious transgression and a sacred duty at the same time. You stand in galleries that haven't seen human visitors in years, surrounded by artifacts that represent thousands of years of human creativity, and try to decide what can be saved, the Mona Lisa or the medical equipment that might save future lives. The Egyptian sarcophagus that demonstrates human thinking about death and immortality, or the engineering texts that explain how to build sustainable infrastructure. Van Gogh's Starry Night, or the seed bank that preserves genetic diversity for future agriculture. You solve the dilemma by creating multiple preservation sites, each focused on different aspects of human civilization. The farmhouse basement becomes your technical archive, engineering manuals, medical texts, scientific journals, mathematical proofs. The old bomb shelter you discovered 12 miles away becomes your cultural repository. Art reproductions, music recordings, literature, philosophy, and religious texts from every tradition you can find. But it's the time capsules that consume most of your energy and represent your deepest fears about being forgotten. You design them with obsessive care, engineering containers that could survive floods, fires, earthquakes, and centuries of weather. Multiple layers of protection, waterproof seals, fireproof materials, corrosion-resistant metals, redundant labeling in multiple languages, including detailed pictographic instructions for beings who might not understand. Human writing systems. Each time capsule tells the story of humanity through carefully chosen artifacts. Photographs showing cities alive with people. Videos of children playing, couples dancing, families celebrating holidays. Music spanning from Beethoven to the Beatles to contemporary artists whose work captured the complexity of modern human experience. Your own testimony, written in multiple languages, explaining who we were and what happened to us. But alongside the inspiring content, you include harder truths. Documentation of wars, environmental destruction, social inequality. Evidence that humans were capable of both extraordinary beauty and devastating cruelty. You refuse to sanitize the historical record because future civilizations deserve to learn from our mistakes as well as our achievements. The most personal time capsule contains items that probably have no practical value but carry emotional weight that feels sacred. Your mother's handwriting in letters she sent you in college. Photos of friends laughing at parties that seem like they happened in a different universe. A recording of your father trying to sing happy birthday despite being tone deaf. Small objects that meant something to people who will never exist again. You seal these containers with ritual care and bury them in locations chosen for geological stability and accessibility. Each burial site gets carefully documented coordinates, detailed maps, and multiple backup markers in case the primary indicators get destroyed. You create a master map showing all the burial sites, which itself gets preserved in multiple locations with instructions for finding the other. Archives maintaining critical infrastructure becomes an act of faith rather than practical necessity. The power plant visits continue, though you're no longer sure why. The automated systems have stabilized into configurations that seem sustainable for decades, possibly centuries. Your presence isn't strictly necessary anymore. The facility will either remain stable or fail catastrophically, regardless of your periodic check-ins. But you keep going anyway, because someone should witness what happens to humanity's most dangerous technology when humans disappear. You document every change, every reading, every sign of degradation or stability. Someday, beings intelligent enough to understand nuclear physics might find your records and learn something useful about long-term reactor behavior without human oversight. The same principle guides your maintenance of libraries, seed banks, and other critical facilities. You're not keeping these places functional for yourself anymore. You're preserving them for hypothetical future intelligences who might benefit from what humanity built and learned. You clear runways at abandoned airports, maintaining them for aircraft that will never come. You protect server farms and data centers that store humanity's digital knowledge, though you have no way to maintain the complex systems required to access that information. You keep radio transmitters operational, broadcasting automated messages that summarize human history and provide coordinates for your various archives. Even though you've stopped believing anyone is listening, these activities provide structure and purpose. But they also confront you daily with the magnitude of what's been lost. Every museum you try to preserve represents thousands of years of human creativity that can never be recreated. Every library you protect contains millions of thoughts and discoveries that will die with you if no one else ever learns to read again. Every cultural site you maintain holds traditions and knowledge that took centuries to develop and can vanish in a single generation without transmission. You become a one-person civilization, trying to be the bridge between everything humans were and whatever might come next. Your documentation grows more elaborate and more desperate as the years pass. You write constantly, journals describing your daily life, technical manuals explaining how to maintain the systems you've built, philosophical treatises about what it means to be human when you're the only human left to define it. The writing serves multiple audiences that may never exist. Future humans, if the species somehow recovers. Other intelligent species if they evolve or arrive from elsewhere. Even artificial intelligences that might someday try to understand their creators. You write love letters to a species that may never read them. We were not perfect. We fought wars over resources and ideas and ancient grievances that should have been forgotten. We damaged our environment and each other in ways that seemed unforgivable. But we also created music that could make people weep with beauty, art that captured truths deeper than words, stories that helped us understand what it meant to be conscious in an indifferent universe. We loved our children with fierce protective instincts that drove us to sacrifice everything for their futures. We formed friendships that lasted lifetimes, partnerships that made us stronger than the sum of our individual selves. We looked up at stars and wondered if we were alone, never imagining that the answer might someday be yes. We were curious. We were creative. We were capable of extraordinary kindness and devastating cruelty. We struggled with questions that had no answers and built civilizations that we knew were temporary. We told ourselves stories about meaning and purpose because consciousness seemed too remarkable to be accidental. Remember us not for our failures, but for our attempts. Remember us not for what we destroyed, but for what we tried to build. We were here, we mattered. We passed this way and left these traces for you to find. Rex dies in year 6 peacefully in his sleep on a cold February morning. You bury him in the garden, where he used to help you plant seeds, marking his grave with a stone, carved with words that will outlast both of you. Rex, good dog. True friend, guardian of the last light. His death hits you harder than you expected, partly because he was your constant companion, but mostly because he represents the end of something irreplaceable. Rex knew the old world. He remembered what it was like when streets were full of cars and houses were full of families. With him gone, you become the sole keeper of those memories. You adopt new animals, younger ones who've known only the empty world, but they're different from the refugees who chose you in those first desperate months. These new companions have no nostalgia for human society because they never experienced it. To them, you're not the last human. You're just the strange creature who provides food and shelter and talks too much. The transition feels symbolic of something larger. The world is forgetting what it was like when humans existed. Each year, more evidence of human civilization disappears under vegetation, weather, and time. Road signs become unreadable. Building foundations crack and settle. Even the most durable monuments show signs of erosion that will eventually return them to raw materials. You're racing against time itself, trying to preserve meaning before entropy erases all evidence that meaning ever existed. Your workshop becomes a scriptorium where you hand copy essential texts onto materials designed to last millennia. You learn techniques from medieval monks, creating illuminated manuscripts on vellum made from animal hides, using inks made from natural materials that won't fade or degrade. The work is painstakingly slow, but it produces documents that could survive for thousands of years, even without special storage conditions. You carve essential information into stone tablets, creating permanent records that could outlast any technological civilization. Mathematical principles, scientific laws, agricultural techniques, medical knowledge, all rendered in symbols and pictographs designed to be interpretable by any intelligence capable of logical thinking. But perhaps most importantly, you carve the story of love, not romantic love specifically, though you include that. The broader concept that humans developed, the idea that consciousness creates bonds and responsibilities that transcend individual survival. You try to explain in pictures and simple words that humans cared for each other, cared for other species, cared for abstract concepts like justice and beauty and truth. These carvings become your most ambitious project, a monument to the idea that consciousness creates meaning even in a universe that offers no inherent purpose. As year 5 draws to a close, you stand in your workshop surrounded by archives that represent everything you've learned about preserving civilization for an uncertain future. Time capsules ready for burial, manuscripts copied by candlelight, stone tablets that could survive ice ages, and digital archives that might last decades if the storage media doesn't degrade. Wilson sits in her usual place, maintaining her expression of professional attention while you plan tomorrow's preservation work. Oscar preens his feathers and occasionally mutters phrases from a dead language that he keeps alive through repetition. Your pack of new animals sleeps around the space heater, trusting you to keep the light burning through another long night. You've become something unprecedented in the history of consciousness, the designated survivor of an entire species, the self-appointed archivist of 8 billion interrupted stories, the keeper of humanity's final flame. The question that drives you now isn't whether anyone will ever find what you're preserving. The question is whether the act of preservation itself, the refusal to let meaning die even when everyone who created that meaning has vanished, is enough to justify the enormous effort of being humanity's last living memorial to itself. 10 years have passed since the morning everyone vanished, and you've become someone you never imagined you could be. The mirror in your bathroom shows a stranger 50 pounds lighter than you were in your previous life, muscles carved by a decade of physical labor, skin weathered by sun and wind and seasons spent entirely outdoors. Your hair has gone prematurely grey, not from age but from carrying responsibilities no human being was ever meant to bear alone. But it's your eyes that tell the real story. They're sharp and alert in ways they never were before, constantly scanning for problems to solve, systems to maintain, threats to address. They're the eyes of someone who's learned to see the world as it actually is, rather than as civilization taught you to believe it was. More than that, they're the eyes of someone who talks constantly to companions only she can see, and who's made peace with being the sole audience for her own performance of being human, because that's what you've realized after 10 years. Being human, when you're the only human left, becomes a conscious performance. You maintain human rituals not because they serve practical purposes, but because someone should remember what it was like when these rituals meant something. You celebrate holidays alone, not out of nostalgia but as a form of archaeological preservation, keeping alive the memory of what humans did when they believed the future would include more humans. Your farm has evolved into something that would amaze the agricultural engineers who designed the original systems. Solar arrays you've expanded and modified using techniques learned from a decade of trial and error. Water collection and purification systems that could support a small village. Gardens that produce enough food to sustain you and your rotating population of animal companions year-round. The automated systems you've built don't just maintain themselves. They've learned from your modifications and adapted in ways that sometimes surprise even you. Irrigation timers that adjust themselves based on weather patterns you program them to recognize. Greenhouse ventilation that responds to plant growth cycles you've documented over multiple seasons. Security systems that can distinguish between familiar animals and potential threats, alerting you only when attention is actually needed. You've created a sustainable paradise that proves one person, given enough determination and the accumulated knowledge of human civilization, can build systems that work better than anything that existed before. But it's lonely in ways that no amount of technological success can address. Your animal companions have become your entire society, and you've learned to read their moods and personalities with the attention anthropologists once devoted to human cultures. Luna the cat has become your chief of security, patrolling the property boundaries and alerting you to changes in the local wildlife patterns. Max, the young border collie who joined your pack 2 years ago, serves as your assistant in the gardens, somehow understanding which plants need attention and guiding you to problems before they become serious. Oscar the parrot, now nearly 15 years old, has evolved into your connection to human language. He's learned to mimic not just words, but entire conversation patterns, creating the illusion of dialogue during long winter evenings when the isolation weighs heaviest. He's developed an uncanny ability to respond to your questions with phrases that seem appropriate, as if he understands context rather than just repeating sounds. Oscar, what do you think about expanding the greenhouse this spring? Sounds like a plan, he'll respond. Or whatever works, or sometimes, heartbreakingly, ask me tomorrow, which was apparently something someone in his previous life used to say. These conversations have become essential to your mental health, even though you know Oscar isn't really talking to you. He's performing his role in the elaborate theater of human interaction that you've created to prevent your mind from forgetting how to relate to other consciousness. Wilson has evolved too. Though she remains physically unchanged, the mannequin you rescued from a department store 8 years ago has become your advisor, your confessor, your silent witness to decisions that affect only you but somehow still require consultation. You've positioned her in different locations throughout your living spaces, Sometimes at the kitchen table for meal planning discussions. Sometimes in the workshop when you're debugging technical problems. Sometimes in the garden when you need to think through long-term agricultural strategies. Wilson, I've been thinking about the monument project. Stone carving is taking longer than expected, and I'm not sure I'll have time to finish everything I want to include. You pause, looking at her plastic face with its expression of professional concern, waiting for the response that will come from your own internal dialogue, but somehow feels more valid when directed toward an external audience. You're right. I should focus on the essential messages and make sure those get completed first. The philosophical speculation can wait. Basic information about human civilization takes priority. These conversations with Wilson have become so natural that you sometimes forget other people might find them strange. But there are no other people to find them anything, so the question of normalcy has become irrelevant. Your daily routines flow with the rhythm of rituals that have evolved over a decade of solitary living. Sunrise meditation in the garden, watching the light wake up the plants you've learned to nurture through seasons of trial and error. Morning rounds checking solar panels, water systems, animal health and weather conditions. Afternoon work sessions that might involve anything from repairing equipment to preserving food to carving stone tablets that will outlast civilizations. Evening performances have become your favorite time of day. You act out remembered movies for an audience of chickens and cats, playing all the parts with theatrical enthusiasm that would embarrass you if anyone else were watching. But no one else is watching. So you've learned to embrace the ridiculous joy of being simultaneously actor, director, and entire audience for productions that exist solely for your own entertainment. You've memorized dozens of films and can perform them with remarkable accuracy, complete with sound effects and costume changes improvised from items scavenged over the years. The animals have learned to recognize these performance times and gather around like they're attending theater, though they're probably just hoping you'll produce snacks during intermission. Music remains sacred, but you've learned to create new traditions around it that serve your psychological needs better than simple nostalgia. You've designated certain songs as seasonal markers, specific pieces that you only listen to when conditions match their emotional content. A melancholy ballad for the first snow of winter. An upbeat anthem for successful harvests. Classical pieces for moments when you need to feel connected to the finest achievements of human creativity. But you've also learned to create music yourself, something you never attempted in your previous life. Singing to the animals during daily chores. Composing simple melodies on a guitar you found abandoned in a music store. Even attempting to write lyrics that capture your unique perspective as humanity's sole survivor. These songs will never be heard by other humans, but they serve an important purpose. They prove that creativity survives even in isolation. That consciousness continues to seek beauty and meaning even when there's no one else to appreciate the results. Your monument project has become the physical manifestation of everything. You've learned about being human in the absence of humanity, carved into a granite outcropping that should survive for millennia. The monument combines practical information with philosophical reflection. Technical diagrams showing how to generate electricity, purify water, grow food, and treat common medical problems. But alongside the practical guidance, you've included more abstract concepts that you hope will convey something essential about human consciousness. The centerpiece is a carved scene showing human figures engaged in activities that defined your species. Teaching children, creating art, caring for the sick, exploring new territories, looking up at stars with wonder and curiosity. Beneath the images, text in multiple languages tries to capture what you've decided are the essential truths about being human. We were here. We loved, we struggled, we created beauty. We feared death yet lived fully. We were never perfect, but we never stopped trying. Remember us. The words feel inadequate for the weight they're meant to carry, but they're the best summary you can provide of 8 billion lives lived in the brief span when consciousness existed on this planet. Working on the monument has become meditation. Therapy and worship rolled into a single activity. Each day you spend carving stone is a day spent thinking about what deserves to be remembered. What lessons might help hypothetical future intelligences? What evidence should remain that consciousness once existed here? Some days the work feels futile. Who will ever find this monument? And would they understand its meaning if they did? Other days it feels like the most important task ever undertaken by any human being. The final service one species member can provide to preserve the memory of everyone who came before. But as the carving nears completion, you realize the monument isn't really for hypothetical future discoverers. It's for you. It's your way of processing 10 years of impossible survival. Your method of transforming grief into something constructive. Your proof that consciousness creates meaning, even when that meaning serves no practical purpose. The seasons have become your calendar, your religion, your connection to time passing in ways that matter. Spring brings the excitement of new growth, the careful planning required to expand your gardens and improve your systems. Summer provides long days for major construction projects and the satisfaction of abundant harvests that prove your mastery of agricultural systems. Autumn brings the solemn work of preservation, canning vegetables, smoking meat, preparing for winter's isolation. But it also brings the beauty of changing leaves and the satisfaction of having successfully completed another year of impossible survival. Winter offers time for reflection, planning, and the deep projects that require sustained attention. It's during winter evenings that you do your most important writing, create your most detailed technical documentation, and work on the philosophical treatises that attempt to explain what it means to be human when you're the only human left to ask the question. You've found peace in the strangest places over these 10 years. The way morning light hits abandoned buildings in the distance, transforming ruins into something beautiful rather than tragic. The sound of wind through empty playground equipment, which no longer reminds you of missing children, but instead suggests music, composed by forces larger than human. Intention, the beauty of nature erasing humanity's scars, has become a source of wonder rather than sadness. Highways cracked by tree roots and reclaimed by wildflowers. Shopping centers transformed into vertical forests, where vines create cathedral spaces more impressive than anything architects ever designed. The gradual return of wildlife to spaces that were industrial zones just a decade ago. You've learned to see these transformations, not as endings, but as continuations. The planet writing new chapters in a story that began long before humans and will continue long after the last evidence of your species has returned to soil and starlight. Your final project has consumed the last 2 years and represents everything you've learned about preserving meaning in the face of absolute entropy. Not just the stone monument, but an entire complex of preservation sites designed to give whatever comes next the best possible chance of understanding what consciousness achieved during its brief flowering on this planet. The technical archives buried in waterproof containers throughout the region. The cultural repositories hidden in caves and reinforced shelters. The agricultural sites maintained as living demonstrations of sustainable food production. The communication arrays that continue broadcasting humanity's story into space. Though you've long since stopped believing anyone is listening, but most importantly, the personal testimonies, thousands of hours of video recordings in which you've attempted to explain not just what humans did, but what it felt like to be human. The experience of falling in love, of losing people you cared about, of creating something beautiful for no reason, except that beauty seemed important. The weight of making moral choices when no one else would ever know whether you chose correctly. These recordings will probably degrade long before anyone finds them. but creating them has helped you process 10 years of experiences no other human being could ever understand. They've been your way of having conversations with people who don't exist, of maintaining the human tradition of sharing stories, even when there's no one left to share them with. As you stand in your workshop on this winter evening, surrounded by the tools and projects that represent a decade of impossible survival, you realize you've accomplished something that would have seemed inconceivable. When you woke up that Tuesday morning 10 years ago, you've kept a light burning, not just the literal lights powered by your solar arrays and maintained through seasons of equipment failures and repairs. You've kept burning the light of consciousness itself, the flame of awareness that recognizes beauty, creates meaning, and refuses to accept that existence is random and purposeless just because the universe offers no inherent guarantees. Oscar preens his feathers in the warm glow of LED lights you've rewired a dozen times. Wilson maintains her expression of professional attention, ready to help you think through whatever tomorrow's challenges might bring. Your pack of animals sleeps contentedly around the wood stove, trusting that you'll keep the warmth and safety going through another long night. Outside, the world continues its patient work of transformation. Stars wheel overhead in patterns that will outlast anything humans ever built. Weather systems move water and energy around the planet, according to physical laws that operated long before consciousness existed and will continue operating long after all memory of consciousness fades. But inside your workshop, in this small bubble of light and warmth and purposeful activity, consciousness persists. Not just surviving, but thriving, creating meaning and beauty and hope, even in the complete absence of anyone else to appreciate these achievements. You've become the guardian of humanity's last flame, the keeper of stories that will die with you, the sole witness to the idea that existence, even solitary existence, is an act of defiance against the dark. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new systems to maintain, new projects to advance. The stone monument needs finishing touches that will take months to complete. The time capsules require final preparations before burial. The broadcasting equipment needs maintenance to ensure humanity's story continues reaching toward whatever intelligence might someday be listening. But tonight, as you prepare for sleep in a bed, warmed by animals who've chosen you as their strange deity, you're proud of something you never expected to accomplish. You've proven that the echo of 8 billion hearts can continue beating in just one. That love and hope and creativity can persist even when they serve no practical purpose. That consciousness creates light even in the deepest darkness. Whether another intelligence finds your monuments in 10 years or 10 million. Whether consciousness ever again emerges to wonder about meaning and purpose and the weight of existence, you've ensured that the universe contains evidence that awareness once existed here. You've kept the human flame burning, not because anyone asked you to, but because letting it die seemed like a betrayal of everyone who ever lived and loved and struggled and hoped. And as you drift towards sleep, in your sanctuary of light, surrounded by the vast silence of an empty world, you carry with you the profound knowledge that you've spent 10 years becoming exactly who humanity needed you to become. Not just its final survivor, but its chosen representative in the ongoing conversation between consciousness and the cosmos. The last light burns on, steady and warm and utterly refused to be extinguished, a beacon that says to whatever vastness surrounds it, we were here, we mattered, we made this place a little brighter while we had the chance, and in the morning, you'll wake up and tend that light for another day. Because that's what love does when it's the only love left in the world. It continues, stubbornly and beautifully and without apology, until the very end.